Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm getting a little feedback. Is anybody else hearing that? Yep. Okay, well, I will keep going here, and maybe I might need to scooch out. Sarah, you're my backup if I do need to scooch out and come back in. Okay. But maybe we'll just start with some introductions. My name is Natalie Waters-Siam. I'm the Director of Admission and Communication. I'm also an MPA parent of a rising 10th grader, Henry. So we have been at MPA now for 10 years. We started in kindergarten, and I'm here with a great panel of guests. We're going to be talking about rigor with purpose today and MPA's own unique form of rigor. Dhruv, maybe you could start with your introduction.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dhruv Mupidi. I'm a rising senior at MPA. I've been here since pre-K kind of, so I was here pre-K through 7, but then for the last 3 years, I was living in Mexico City, and then I returned to MPA again my junior year, so this is like my second year back.
Hannah, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Hannah Sullivan. I'm an upper school science teacher. So right now I teach physics, anatomy, environmental science, and chemistry. And I've been at MPA since 2005 with, similar to Dhruv, a small break in the middle, but I've been back now for 6 or 7 years.
And I am Sarah Moan, and I am an upper school English teacher. And I'm starting my 6th year at MPA after finishing my 30th year teaching. My career, a lot of it was in several different schools, and was happily landed at MPA. And I have taught 9th grade English, I've taught AP, and I've taught a whole bunch of different senior electives and advised the yearbook. And this year we'll be launching the junior humanities course, American Studies.
Love it. Jordan.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jordan Akers. I'm a recent graduate of the class of 2020. I came to MPA in pre-K, and I kind of had a little break in the middle like Dhruv. Like I was at MPA from pre-K to 7th grade, and then came back in 9th grade. And next year I'll be a freshman at Yale University.
Love it. Thank you all for being here, for taking some time out of your Friday. Welcome to everybody who's watching us via Facebook Live. These conversations are just meant to be really casual opportunities to get to know members of our community, to talk about topics that matter, things we're hearing about in the Office of Admission, and just in general from our current parents as well. So today, like I said, we're talking about rigor with purpose and MPA's own unique form. I've got a set of questions, but I really want to encourage questions from our audience on Facebook. We'll be able to see them and share them and respond to them. So please keep those coming anytime. But Hannah, I'd love to start with you. MPA families often come to us looking for more academic rigor. What is it that you think they're looking for, and why, as the parent of a young child yourself? 2 children, excuse me.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think for me, both as a parent and a teacher, it's really important that kids are curious about the world around them, and that they are really engaged in learning. I want my kids to be excited about learning every day, and I want them to have the skill set they need to dive really deeply into complex topics, even at a young age. So I don't necessarily want them to have an incredible workload. Balance is really important to me, but I also want to make sure that they're really challenged every day. It's important for me that they can pursue things that they're interested in, and that they develop that core set of skills that will let them do that later in life. I also really want my kids to be doing stuff. I want them to be moving around, making stuff, collaborating with other kids, learning to express their ideas in a larger group setting or with another person. And those are sort of the same things I look for in my upper school science classes as well. The same things I'm looking for my 1st grader and 2nd grader apply in that area.
Yeah, good. You touched on a lot of things that really represent MPA's unique form of academic rigor, where we focus more on deep understanding as opposed to memorization, really active and engaged learning as opposed to students sitting back and hearing information. They're actually participating in their own learning experience. Sarah, talk a little bit about what Rigor with Purpose looks like in your classroom and what's different about MPA's form.
You know, in my English classroom, it is all about kind of exploration of the ideas, and it's digging in with discussion in small groups, batting around ideas, having a chance to try on different ideas. There's definitely a bit of content knowledge that's essential in order to have the vocabulary to talk about things. So we lay some of that groundwork, but that groundwork is laid not in a way to take it in and spit it back so that you can use that to have a common vocabulary and understanding, and then building your skills. And so the skills really are the important part in terms of how do you tackle a difficult text and break something down in a way that's going to give you confidence and not make you feel overwhelmed as you encounter difficult texts, and how do you handle a complicated conversation about something that might be a touchy issue. So that is kind of, I think, we think a lot about that, and we're constantly thinking about how does it relate to the world that's currently happening, as well as understanding the literature and the voices and the humanity that's presented, so that we can understand and move out into the world beyond classroom.
Sarah, how does that look different at MPA than the other schools that you've been a part of?
I think, number one, our class size helps a lot with that, in terms of every student has a valuable voice, and there is room and there is time to develop those skills, particularly in discussion. And the attention we can give to writing feedback. I always say I used to grade, I had 80 to 85 essays come in at a time when at my previous job. You know, it was a weekend. I would just sit down and bury myself in the weekend, and that was what I did. And the family knew to kind of leave me alone. And now I have, 20 to 30 essays from 2 different sections that might come in, and I still bury myself for the weekend, and everybody knows to leave me alone, that I'm spending the same amount of time because I can. So that, I think, really helps encourage that rigor, because kids can be really focused and pushed more with feedback and comments in a way, as Hannah touched on, that doesn't translate to more. I think other environments I've been in, teachers have confused rigor with more. And I want them to just think harder, not necessarily longer. That is not a translation. And I think places I've been before, that has been the expectation of rigor was the homework load and the hours, instead of how engaged their brain is and how comfortable they are with it being difficult. That's probably my biggest goal. I think with 9th graders, when they're starting, my biggest goal is to have them okay when they don't know the answer right away, and okay when it feels difficult, and to not panic and not think that that doesn't mean they're not smart enough. It means they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're wrestling with a really big, complicated idea, and to feel comfortable with that, I think, translates to so many different skills. And I think that is something I think I've seen not developed as well or cultivated as well in other environments. Something I'm super thankful we have the time and space to do.
Yeah, I love that. Think harder, not longer. I might quote you on that, Sarah. Good. Jordan, talk a little bit about some of the most rigorous aspects of your time at MPA.
Yeah, so I definitely think to the classes I've taken in history and English, because I'm naturally kind of more of like a math and science type of person. And I can think specifically to like my junior English class with Ms. Murr, and how it was kind of on the onus of students to do the readings each night. And there wasn't really quizzes on them. It's just you do them, and the next day you come to class and you have these really kind of in-depth conversations about the primary text, and you use what you annotated the night before, and you just have these really deep conversations that force you to think not only at home when you're doing the homework, but also in class when you're having those deep conversations.
Yeah, good. Drew, what would you add?
Yeah, I also was going to talk. I was thinking about this, and I think one of the things that really stood out to me was in US history, everyone does this project, and every junior takes US history. And in second semester, you do this project. And I just remember being absolutely blown away by some of the projects of my peers, whether that was like a documentary about intersectional feminism or researching the voter suppression like targeted at Asian Americans. I just remember like thinking, like these are 7 to 10 hour projects that go deeper than just like, applying what you learned in US history, like dates or names, like a test. And it really just shows, like how at MPA, like the overarching significance of the theme that you're learning is much more, it's prioritized much more than just, studying for the sake of a test or a presentation that you might do.
Yeah, good. I love that. Hannah, maybe you could talk a little bit about the skills and attributes that you're working on in your classrooms too.
Yeah, absolutely. So in science at MPA, things are very lab-based, and obviously there's content that's really important, particularly in chemistry or physics, where there's a set of core content that we expect kids to come out of high school with. But we're also really focused on that lab component, and we want students to be able to work collaboratively. We want them to be able to plan and conduct an investigation, so figure out, okay, here's my question. What part of that is just asking the right questions and being able to determine what question they want to ask. And then can they design an experiment from scratch? Can they conduct that experiment with their peers? Can they gather data and then make sense of that data? Can they argue based on that data that they've derived? Can they plan for their follow-up experiments? And then, going along with what Sarah's doing in the English department and what they're doing in history, can they write about it? And can they express what they learned in the lab and write scientifically? We also want them to be able to do background research. So it's very unlikely that even a student that pursues science, that they're going to pursue something that was precisely what I taught them in a science class or what I helped them learn. They're going to have to explore new topics, and they'll have to be able to read complex journal articles and analyze that information. So those are all the things that we're trying to get at in the science classroom.
Yeah. Henry was blown away by the amount of writing in your ninth grade physics class. Yeah. And it was a different way to think about science.
Yeah, and one of the things that we sometimes hear is like, how can you do physics in ninth grade? Because physics is math, and you can't do physics without math. And I think a lot of times we do math, and the kids are capable of doing some hard math, but physics isn't math. You can hide behind formulas, but if you can't explain Newton's laws and you can't explain forces in motion in words, then you're just hiding behind mathematical formulas and you don't truly understand the concepts. So there is a lot of writing and talking and trying to communicate complex ideas and help kids not get frustrated, because physics is really hard and it's a challenging subject, and we want to push ninth graders, but we want them to understand that it's okay not to have a perfect understanding of all of physics. That took tens of thousands of years. So.
Right. Love it. Sarah, could you talk a little bit more about those skills and attributes beyond the content knowledge?
Yes. In the English world, I think it's two different kind of sets of skills. One is communication, is that how can you communicate effectively in writing and verbally a complex idea. And to do that, they have to be pushed to think with that and wrestle with that complex idea. So definitely that thinking critically, how do you support something? How do you find evidence? And then develop your idea and have confidence in also your own reading and your own idea and your own interpretation, that you're not going and looking for the right reading of a difficult text. You are forming your reading of it and then supporting that with the evidence from the text. So that ability to articulate that in writing and then formulate an argument, for sure, that really is what even literary analysis is formulating an argument. Discussion skills, I think, are really critical, that people feel comfortable. And I always tell my kids, the most important skill in discussion is listening, is if you are paying attention to what your classmates are saying and pushing the conversation further. So often I've been part of discussions where a kid says something, if they're great at discussion, like, I gotta say something, I gotta get my idea out, and they say something, and check, boom, I got my point, and they kick back. Instead of, it's far more important that you're listening and you can build it, and can you push that conversation further. And then everybody starts where they're at. There are some students that just to say something, that's a big leap for them. So we talk a lot about growth in that, and discussion is really, really important to me in those skills, because those skills are going to go far beyond their academic future into every aspect of their life, I think. And then the human skills in terms of recognizing humanity. And we will constantly talk about understanding the complexity of something. And I think that's something that literature brings. And this year, as we're going to really marry the literature with the history, helping to really understand the nuance of something. As you know, it's so rare to be able to put something in one pile or another when you look at the complexity and the humanity of someone's story and get into their skin and see it from their point of view. So there's a lot of those other different skills about building really good, thoughtful human beings. That is for sure why I'm an English teacher. And I think we work really hard at MPA to develop that.
Yeah. Really, aren't those the skills that students will need for jobs that perhaps don't even exist yet?
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things in science that I forgot that I think is really important is taking what we're seeing in the classroom and connecting it to what they see in the world around them. And that could be something that they're studying in English or history. Yeah. But I know Jordan has done a lot out in the community with service and other things related to science, but even just what did you observe in the world around you, and how does it relate to the physics problems that we're doing, or how could you tackle a problem that you've encountered in the world around you that you feel passionately about? How could you tackle it with science? I think that's really important.
Yeah. Jordan, maybe tell us a little bit about that service work that you've done and how it ties to your MPA education.
Yeah, for sure. So throughout my high school experience, I did a STEM certificate of distinction. I was working on that for all 4 years, which basically, I guess if there's anyone watching who doesn't really know what it is, it's basically outside of school, I did a lot of enrichment activities having to do with science, technology, engineering, and math, and also took classes over my 4 years having to do with that. And to culminate that experience as a senior, I did a service project where basically I kind of thought about what I would like to do within my community, and kind of using the issues that we talk about at school. And specifically, I wanted to tackle environmental sustainability. So I helped a woman in my community who has a small organic farm, and I helped her kind of develop that and just really engage with the community in that way. And I think that was a product of the type of learning that we do at MPA, and just really applying what we learned to the outside world. So
yeah, love it. Mrs. Moen touched on this idea of failing and how important it is for kids to fail and to feel uncomfortable through failure, but also become more resilient through it. Drew and Jordan, tell us about your most epic fails at MPA.
Yeah. So I think when you look at something like speech and debate, there's such a big part of the MPA community. In speech, you probably have like 40, 50 students every year. And then in debate, you have like, I think this year there were like 80, and there are even like classes in the curriculum designed for debate. So I think those two are such a big part of the MPA community. And then speech and debate, they're not like inherently rewarding experiences immediately. So you'll go into these competitions with, 70, 80 people in your category. And at the end of the day, probably only like a very small percentage of those people are actually recognized for like being successful with prizes or trophies or medals. So my experience with speech and debate, so I made the wonderful idea to sing at the beginning of my speech. And unlike Jordan, we're not all gifted singers. I remember some judges being like, this is the absolute weirdest thing I've ever seen. And then I remember some other judges saying, no, this is the funniest thing I've ever seen. So immediately there were some awkward moments, there was some bad singing, and that was pretty uncomfortable. But being able to take the feedback constructively, being able to filter out what was worthwhile, what feedback was actually worth taking, and what feedback you probably shouldn't be taking. And then that really kind of helps transform what was ultimately a pretty weird piece with all the singing to something that ended up being pretty successful in the end.
That's awesome. I love that example. Jordan, what's your biggest, most epic fail?
Definitely in English. I can remember I think in 11th grade, like the first paper I wrote was probably one of the lowest grades I ever had, like kind of throughout high school. And I was kind of taken aback by that, especially because kind of like I said before, writing isn't something that I was kind of naturally good at. And so kind of failing multiple times at that, I learned eventually. I eventually started to look at, the things that were like written on my papers and trying to improve upon that. And eventually having the confidence to take an AP English course my senior year, I feel like I learned from that, that I should kind of tackle those sorts of problems with a mindset of, okay, this is bad now, but how can I take this and improve upon that? And I think I've definitely gone forward with that sort of growth mindset.
Yeah, that's great. Hannah, could you talk about how MPA's unique form of academic rigor and rigor with purpose really prepares students for higher education?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, students at MPA get a very broad education. They're not specialized in one particular area. They might have a passion, but most students, or all students, are exploring all areas. For the science department, we have kids come back to us who are studying science or pursuing a medical degree. And they always talk about how well prepared they were. They talk about how hard it is. The pacing of a lot of science courses at the college level, particularly for science majors, is very, very fast paced. So the speed at which they fly through content can feel really uncomfortable, because at MPA, we're often spending more time so we can dive deeper into content. But students are really, they really are very successful in those courses because they have the skills that they need to do a large amount of reading, to learn quickly, to just be efficient in how they're doing things. And then in terms of lab-based science, they tend to be they go into these lab classes where a lot of students haven't had the opportunity to explore the lab as much as they do. So they can really be leaders because they know how to use the lab equipment. They know how to conduct an experiment. They know how to keep a lab notebook. So that's one of the areas where they really shine. And I think a lot of what we do is this sort of skills-based approach where students come out of MPA with a really good toolbox of skills that they can use. And I know for myself, when I was coming out of high school, I decided to be an engineer because I was really uncomfortable with the idea of not being something. I wanted to graduate with I am an engineer. I know how to do this. And I thought that's what engineering was. And then I went to a school that didn't have that approach at all. And the school I went to was very process-based, very can you solve problems? Can you tackle something new? And when we came out of that college, a lot of the major employers who hired engineers would talk about how we were the worst employees right away because we didn't know how to plug into a formula and build a bridge, or we didn't know anything about concrete and how you'd have to lay the right amount of concrete for a foundation. We knew none of that, but we knew how to learn really quickly, and we knew how to solve problems, and we knew how to tackle the unexpected. We weren't just plug and chug into a formula. And I think MPA is really similar because kids are really well equipped to do whatever it is they want to do and tackle whatever it is they want to tackle.
Yeah. Sarah, what do you hear from alums who return to MPA about their preparation, I should say, for higher ed?
I think we hear continually how well prepared they were for the writing assignments, that they go in very pleasantly surprised, I think, at how well they can handle the writing and the difficulty of the text. I think they come back continually, just are grateful and thankful that, which is, I think, speaks to our block system a lot, that, when I switched from the block system, we do have fewer hours total, the kids, but that depth that we do and the rigor that they're jumping into from the get-go leaves them really confident, and then feeling confident once they're in their college classes that they are absolutely performing and prepared for the school that's right for them, from the most rigorous to colleges that are a better fit. So we hear good things. They come back very grateful.
And that's what really the college search is all about at MPA, is finding the right fit for each individual child and what they're looking for. Jordan, maybe you could talk a little bit about your recent college search and how you landed at Yale and what you're looking forward to.
Yeah, for sure. So I started meeting with Miss Peterson probably like my freshman year, just because I was always kind of had this in the back of my mind, like how is this going to apply to what I'm doing, like for applying to college and whatnot. And I mean, that was from the get-go very helpful to be able to meet with the college counselor as a freshman. But yeah, by the time I was a senior, I really didn't know kind of what I wanted to do really at all. I applied probably to close to 20 schools. And I really did get help all throughout this process. Even I also auditioned at music conservatories along with applying to traditional universities. And I think at one point I was meeting with Ms. Peterson or Ms. Coltzetter or both, like twice a week, just to like work on essays and figure all this out. Because I wasn't the most on top of it, because I didn't start writing my essays in the summer before my senior year like most people do. I started like a month into school. But yeah, eventually once I figured out all the places that I had gotten into, it was kind of like, well, I want to be at a place where I can kind of pursue the things that I'm interested in, things that I'm passionate about, especially having to do with like environmental sustainability and whatnot, but also be able to explore new things, especially in the realm of English and history, which I previously had struggled a lot with, and now I'm just very interested and want to learn more about that. And I can also do music on the side. I can kind of really do everything that I'm interested in, and that is ultimately how I ended up at Yale and chose that. Yeah.
Drew, how are your essays coming this summer?
Oh, well, I've been busy teaching with Breakthrough, so let's just say that, like Jordan, we might be starting a little late this summer. But hopefully, I can get a few drafts done before school starts in late August. And yeah, good. Let's close here with one final question for each of our students, but I just first want to encourage any questions from the audience. We would love to field any that you have, but maybe Drew, what do you want to do with your education from MPA? So I think in the short term, I mean, like Jordan, I think, and like Miss Sullivan and Miss Moen touched on, I think the education at MPA is pretty good preparation for the type of education I'd receive in college. So I think that's probably what's on my mind in the short term. But looking in the big picture here, and this is all subject to change because, you know, so many people end up changing their intended like place of interest or course of interest. But I think, you know, living in Mexico for 3 years was something that definitely transformed like the way I think, something that impacted the way I look at the world. And it really made me like interested in housing inequality and just overall income inequality in general. So whether I go into something like I'm interested in studying, I think I'm interested in studying economics in college. So whether I go into like business or law from that, I think overall, like I definitely want to find a way to, you know, give back one way or another to and find ways to, you know, address issues of income inequality and housing inequality. And that's something I think that's pretty passionate for me. Great. Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I don't know for sure kind of what I want to do, but I definitely want to use the tools that I've gains at MPA in terms of looking at the issues in the world and kind of having this mindset of, I can tackle difficult things with enough effort, use that to take on these larger problems such as sustainability, and really work at solving them like one kind of small step at a time.
Yeah, I love it. It's so MPA. So thank you all for joining us today and for having this really great conversation about an important topic. I would just invite people to join us next week. We're going to be talking next Friday, August 7th, about the return on investment of a private school education. Is it really worth it? So that's next week's conversation. Thank you again to all of you for joining us here as guests and everybody watching on Facebook. Have a lovely weekend, everyone.